Hello and welcome to BBC World News. I'm Martine Dennis.
And I'm Sally Bundock. Here are the headlines. Also in World Business Report, the debate over immigration in the US, where a controversial reform bill is on its way through the Senate.
But we start the programme this morning in West Africa as President Obama's arrived in Dakar, the capital of Senegal, for the first leg of his trip to the continent. Well, this is his first major tour of the region, and he will also go to South Africa and Tanzania. The president's only previous visit to Africa whilst in office was in 2009, and then he spent just one day in Ghana. Here's Julie Peacock. Well, the BBC's Nick Bryant is in Sydney, and recycled failure sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it, Nick? So Kevin Rudd has done it again, but at what cost to the Labour Party? Because a large tranche of the senior leadership actually left with Julia Gillard. Opposition leader making political capital out of the fact that Labour is in a state of disarray, shall we say. But what will be the strategy for trying to turn around Labour's fortunes for these elections scheduled for September?
Excellency, I present the
All right, Nick, we seem to have had a few technical problems towards the end of it, but we got the gist of what you were saying, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Sally's here. She's got all the business news. And first up, it's the EU finally having come up with some sort of formula which will stop us, the public, having to stump up for banks when they get into trouble.
That's right. They've been grappling with the question of when a bank goes bust, who should pay? And finance ministers, EU finance ministers, have been talking all night about this. It was an overnighter again, negotiations that led to a deal struck in the early hours of this morning. EU leaders saying they've agreed on rules for future bank bailouts in a bid to avoid the massive costs to taxpayers that were seen following the 2008 crisis. Now, according to news agencies, the deal's expected to be signed off today at an EU summit, which begins in a few hours. It will form one of the pillars of the planned Europe-wide banking union. So what do we know about it so far? Well, according to a draft proposal, if a bank runs into trouble in the future, shareholders and creditors would be the first to shoulder any losses. And if that's not enough to prop up a lender, small companies and savers with deposits of more than €100,000 would also take a hit. Now, only then would money be released from Europe's $500 billion bailout fund. That's the European Stability Mechanism. So, as you can see, the shareholders have to pay out first, and then those with €100,000 or more in deposit will be hit next. So, it seems these rules will apply equally to all countries, despite requests by some for further flexibility. That's been a key sticking point, as Kem Ifejika reports. So we'll have more on that. We'll be discussing that with a trader here based in London as to the implications of that. Also in business, the debate over immigration in the United States, where a massive reform bill is on its way through the Senate. It will give millions of illegal immigrants the right to earn their citizenship. Now, despite high unemployment in the US, the agricultural sector continues to grapple with a shortage of labour. Many farmers are pinning their hopes on the immigration reform bill to help solve the problem. We'll have a special report from North Carolina, which is leading the way in issuing temporary visas to foreign farm workers. Also, we'll be looking at the fallout from the musical chairs in Australia. As Nick Bryant mentioned, Wayne Swan has stepped down. He, of course, is the Finance Minister as well as Deputy Prime Minister. So what does that mean for the Australian economy? We'll be talking about all those issues in about 20 minutes. See you then.
See you then, Sal. Thank you. Now let's go to Egypt, where the President, Mohamed Morsi, has warned that continuing unrest is threatening to paralyse the entire country. In a speech marking his first year in office, Mr Morsi acknowledged that he did make some mistakes. Tim Nielsen has the details. Now, South Africa's President Jacob Zuma's cancelled a trip to Mozambique, underlining the uncertainty surrounding the condition of Nelson Mandela, who remains critically ill in hospital. Earlier, Mr Zuma sang a rousing anti-apartheid song for the 94-year-old in Zulu as he opened a conference in Johannesburg. The many skills of Jacob Zuma. Lots more to come here at BBC World News, including this: liquid gold, how Italian olive oil producers are looking east for their fortunes. Right, let's have a look at some of the main stories from around the UK this morning. And first up, You're with BBC World News. I'm Martine Dennis. These are our top stories this morning. Spanish police are continuing to investigate the deaths of a British man and 2 women whose bodies were found in their villa in the south of Spain. US Secretary of State John Kerry is due to meet Israeli and Palestinian leaders again as he continues his efforts to revive peace talks. As well as looking at political and security issues, the Americans are working on a comprehensive plan to try to boost the Palestinian economy. Yolande Nell reports. Now, everyone knows that the Italian economy is in a bit of a fix at the moment. It remains mired in recession, but the country still has a reputation around the world for producing pretty classy products. And the humble olive oil could be opening up tantalising possibilities in China, as Alan Johnson has been finding out. Now, it's been almost a week in captivity for this man here, the co-owner of an American medical supplies firm, and his name is Chip Starnes. Now, he's being held hostage by his own workers at a factory in China. He's been prevented from leaving the plant, which is close to Beijing. He says workers who fear production will be moved to India are demanding severance pay, but other reports say employees want 2 months' unpaid wages. Russell Trott has the story. Well, that's a story we're going to be following here at BBC World News. Let's move on to tennis now. Roger Federer, the king of Wimbledon, has been dethroned by Sergei Stakhovsky. The defending champion was beaten in 4 sets by the 116th ranked Ukrainian. Well, the upsets didn't end there. The 2004 women's champion Maria Sharapova, she also went out after losing in straight sets to Portugal's Michelle Larcher de Brito. She's ranked 131. The Russian claimed the conditions of the courts at Wimbledon played a part in her exit. Lots more to come here at BBC World News, so don't go away. You're with BBC World News. I'm Martine Dennis. These are the headlines. Well, those are the latest headlines from BBC World News. Time now for the latest financial news, and Sally has got her hand on the money today in World Business Report.
Hello and welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, loyal to Gillard, Wayne Swan quits as Australia's Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. We assess the outlook for the Australian economy. But first, when a bank goes bust, who should pay? That's the big question facing EU finance ministers. And after marathon overnight negotiations, a deal was struck in the early hours of this morning. EU leaders say they've agreed on rules for future bank bailouts in a bid to avoid the massive cost to taxpayers that was seen following the 2008 crisis. According to news agencies, the deal's expected to be signed off at today's EU summit, which begins in a few hours. It will form one of the pillars of the planned Europe-wide banking union. So what do we know about it so far? Well, according to a draft proposal, if a bank runs into trouble in future, shareholders and creditors would be the first to shoulder any losses. And if that's not enough to prop up the lender, small companies and savers who've got deposits of more than €100,000 would also take a hit. Only then would money be released from Europe's $500 billion bailout fund, the European Stability Mechanism. And it seems these rules will apply equally to all countries, despite requests from some for further flexibility. Ken Ifejika reports. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Michael Hewson, Senior Market Analyst at CMC Markets. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning,
nice to
Sally.
see you. So let's assess this. The Dutch Finance Minister is saying this marks a big change in the way banks will be bailed out in the future. What do you make of this deal? One of the key issues with this is that the taxpayer is last to shoulder losses when a bank needs to be bailed out in the future. That was always a political hot potato, wasn't it? In a way, they had to do something to sort of arrange a system that meant the taxpayers didn't bear the brunt. All right, Michael, well, thank you very much for your analysis. And of course, Michael will return because he'll talk us through today's newspaper stories, of which there's a lot of money news in there too. But let's now move on to other stories in this programme. The debate over immigration in the US, where a massive reform bill is on its way through the Senate, is very much to the fore. It will give millions of illegal immigrants the right to earn their citizenship. Despite high unemployment in the US, the agricultural sector continues to grapple with a shortage of labour. Many farmers are pinning their hopes on an immigration reform bill working its way through the Senate to help solve the problem. Michelle Fleury reports from North Carolina, the #1 state in America to issue temporary visas to foreign farm workers. Now, as you've been hearing, a bitter political battle has led to a dramatic change in leadership in Australia. So what will this mean for its economy? Let's speak to Rico Hizon, who's at our Asia Business Hub in Singapore. Nice to see you, Rico. So it's musical chairs in Australia.
Sally.
All right, very interesting. Thank you, Rico, keeping us up to date. Well, let's have a look at the markets just to see how these stories are being interpreted by investors around the world. Of course, Asia is open and trading at the moment. Look at that, a strong day in Japan at almost 2.5%. Hong Kong also fairly strong. And we haven't got the Australian markets, but also Australia was riding higher, about 1.5% higher. Interesting the reasons why. Basically, the Federal Reserve could perhaps hold back on tapering stimulus measures for the US, partly because news about growth in the United States was a little bit slower than estimated. So believe it or not, the market's like that today. I will see you soon for a look through the papers. Stay with us.
Now, here in the UK, energy and transport will be the focus today as the government reveals how £100 billion will be spent on new infrastructure, major projects to build roads, homes and support for the nuclear industry are expected to be announced. Britain's Chancellor said new infrastructure projects would help raise Britain's national game. But the Labour Party says investment is needed much quicker. Robin Brandt reports. Now, coming up at 6 o'clock on breakfast, Charlie and Louise will be here. They'll have all the day's news, the business and the sport. They'll also have more on a new study. I'm Martine Dennis, and these are the top stories here at BBC World News this morning. All right, we're going to have a look at the stories that are making headlines in the international press this morning. And we start with well, Michael's still here. Michael Hewson, Senior Market Analyst at CMC Markets. You were here a bit earlier, Michael, but good morning to you again, and thank you for staying on to do the newspapers with us. And starting with this landmark decision by the Supreme Court in the United States, which effectively sort of brings the US in line with many Western European countries on the status of gay marriage.
Now let's have a look at what happened in Australia. South China Morning Post looking at the story. Many of the papers are pretty abrupt manoeuvring. But
I must say I'm rather taken by all of the controversy surrounding her being the first female head of government in Australia, and because she talked about it not being an easy environment to work in, and there have been some nakedly misogynistic remarks made against her, even in the
most recently,
you know, the almost holy shrine of Parliament. But they've really let rip.
I've always been a comment, Martine.
I've got to raise this, because we learn from the South China Morning Post that Kevin Rudd's name in Chinese is Lu Kewen. And he speaks fluent Chinese, of course.
Does he?
Yeah, he does.
Ooh,
yeah.
Very interesting. OK, let's now move on to George Osborne, who is all over the papers, certainly the UK papers today. This is the Guardian's take on particularly the European economy, which is so important to our economy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We trade more with the Europeans than most.
So you'd agree then with the Chancellor when he says that the British economy is out of the intensive care and is now in recovery mode?
Yes, well, HS2 is very much on the front page of the Financial Times, right next to the story about gold. But Osborne overhaul undercut by an £8 billion overspend on HS2. HS2 being the high-speed rail link whizzing passengers from London. Now, gold. Let's talk about gold. Actually, gold futures are higher today following the growth figures coming out of the United States. And again, this constant second guessing as to when. Good question.
Now, can we move you on to crosswords? Do you like them?
I don't mind them, actually, but my partner...
Are you good at them?
That doesn't sound
That's
very enthusiastic, does it?
I generally don't have time to do them. Prefer Sudoku.
Ah, OK. Well, they've been described as the most civilised way of wasting time. But I think we need to move on, don't you? Seeing as we are running out of
none of us do crosswords. So let's talk about Wimbledon.
Tennis.
And farewell Federer.
And Sharapova.
Champion, Maria Sharapova as well. Champion crashes out because they're falling over too much. They're falling over a lot.
Well, maybe it's their footwear. You could make the same argument with footballers who always slip over. It's their footwear. I would
So
argue
it's not
a,
the green grass at Wimbledon, the
well,
quality
grass
of the
is
lawns.
Grass is grass,
Well,
isn't it? It's the same for everybody.
All right. Well, what do you think of Andy? How is he shaping up at the moment?
He looks good. I think he looks good.
Are
I
you
think
putting some money on him?
I might have a little flutter, yeah.
This could be the year.
I might
This
have
could
already
be
had a
the
little
year.
flutter.
It could be, couldn't it?
It could,
Well,
and that's going to
last
put more
year-
pressure on him, though, isn't it?
Of course, Federer beat him at the final last year, and now he's out. So.
But he's got Djokovic. If he gets through
Thank
to the
you
final.
very much. Thank you, and thank you for being with us.
Take care. Bye bye.